Hello.
Hi.
Yeah.
Here we have a table full of
Not
computers.
very environmentally.
Not very environmental of us. So we're from Unit 13. I'm Zainab.
And I'm Sude.
So
This year we're focusing on the British Museum, and our whole year is about how to reimagine the museum.
yeah, and then these are 13 site-specific interventions at the British Museum. So how can we reimagine encyclopedic museums like the British Museum in the age of existential change? So, would people visit the British Museum if all their objects were returned to their sites of origin? How would restitution impact the annual collective carbon of 52 million tons of CO2 that visitors spend to travel to museums?
Can strategies of collaborative interpretation expose imperialistic practices of colonization and theft in the British Museum's collection?
How can we reframe the collection to communicate contextual climate matters?
Does the British Museum's claim to universality mask underlying power dynamics in cultural representation?
What are the extractive processes of pigment making, and can we make this practice more sustainable?
Can digital technologies increase a museum's cultural footprint while minimizing its carbon footprint?
How do we break down the borders of the museum?
Can museums become environmental refuges?
Can museums galvanize communities into action on climate change issues?
Can museums subvert dominant global powers to bring social justice?
Do museums' capitalist processes intensify or reduce environmental injustices?
How do we balance off the cost of restoration and repair against museums' extractive funding sources, such as BP, that pay for it?
Can we rethink museum operations and practices of care to minimize their carbon and environmental footprint?
That was our
And that's our unit.
presentation. Thank you.
They're all very good questions.
Thank you.
Do you have any inclination of how you might start to answer them?
It is a process for sure.
It's all
Sorry?
our projects.
All of your projects?
Yeah, all the questions that we individually have, the 13 of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
The very first 3 weeks, the students made these site-specific interventions in order to explore the British Museum and open up the questions. So the rest of the year is kind of designing the museum response
Okay.
and answering the questions.
so one way you might start to think about this is a museum is a collection of past climates from particular bioregions around the world. I know there are questions about colonialism and all of those kind of things, but you can't answer everything. And in a way, I don't think anyone has ever made that kind of analysis about collected artifacts, that they are representative or capture within a prior climate. Some of them very ancient, where the climates were, there were very, very few humans, and we have the numbers, if you need them, for world populations or regional populations from the past, and even from very ancient cities. And there's a very strange book, which is just a collection of typewritten numbers, which is 4,000 years of urban history, which is just listing the population of particular cities and places. So in a way, it's not only their artifacts, but it's their cultural origin. And culture always originates in response to a particular location, and social structures evolved because of that. What you do with it, that then becomes a way of rethinking what a museum is, and then what it might be in the future. And today's presence in London will be tomorrow's future somewhere else. And I think that those kind of discussions and that you can be very particular about them and map them very carefully, but they're also provide you with a kind of strong intellectual frame for the relationships of culture to artifacts and to representation. And as your kind of I don't know if that's the sub-themes of the unit, but.
Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely compelling questions that you've set yourself up for. I agree with Mike. I'm just dying to know how you're going to go about it. I also really appreciate the idea of the snapshots of environment or biotopes that have been captured. I think that's a really great insight. And this kind of idea of, when you're discussing things like, how does it become more sustainable? Sustainability not as just a carbon number, but that kind of the making environmental connections, a kind of maybe stitching back together relationships as well as spaces. I love what you're trying to do. I think also about the future of the museum. But the other question, and I know it's the colonial question, but I do think it needs deeply complicating, which is when it's, we are going to do this, we are going to do that, that kind of location of the we or the I, my vision of the museum, or that's going to be a kind of an irreducible difficulty of taking any position on the museum because of its nature. And I just wanted to raise that. I was just trying to think about how you could step outside the human, but that might be, you're already kind of like way over my comfort zone already, but you're really, asking questions and about about what it is that when we go to a museum now, what it is that we're expecting, as opposed to the private collections that were coming out of the 19th century, which weren't for everybody. And that kind of evolution is a really nice and complex trajectory.
Museums exist in this kind of weird duality of originating once as scholarly bodies, and if you go down the road and photograph in the mornings of British Museum, you'll see these immense tourist queues. And I haven't been inside in one of those, but my wife has, and she said you can't move.
With no bags, you can just go. That's what we have been doing for the last month.
We figured it out.
So there's an oddity to how museums originated and their cultural presence today. And I don't know what the future is, but one of your tasks is to think what a museum might be in the future. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you guys.